Welcome to Session 2 of the Online Human Rights Training. In this session, you will learn about dignity rights, freedoms of everyday life, and residential rights. Dignity. Each individual has the right to services that respond to their needs and preferences and are person-centered. The state defines person-centeredness to mean focusing on the needs and preferences of the individual, empowering and supporting the individual in defining the direction for his or her life, and promoting self-determination, community involvement, and recovery. So we want to make sure that our therapeutic practices always cover this regulation of being person-centered. Dignity name. Each individual has the right to use their preferred or legal name. In other words, be very careful when you are using nicknames for our individuals. We want to make sure that the name that they're being called is the one that they truly want to be called. We don't create nicknames for people. We want to avoid words like honey and sweetie and those words that devalue the people that we're supporting. Also, with this regulation, we can place limits on the use of the person's legal name. The best example I have of that is, let's say that an individual's name is John Jr. and John Sr. used to severely abuse John physically. Every time that you say the name John, John Jr. balls up in the corner and starts crying. We then may want to look at, do we need to come up with a different name or help John Jr. come up with a different name that isn't causing this psychological harm to him? Now again, the behavioral specialist is the person that's going to be determining, is this psychological harm due to the name? Is that really what's going on with the individual and why they're balling up in the corner? If they determine that that is the case, they're going to meet with the individual and they're going to see, well, hey, how would you like to be called Junior or JJ? And then a part of their plan will address this. So in the individual support plan, it's going to explain to you as a DSP why we call him JJ, and it's going to also warn you not to use the name John. Dignity rights. Each individual has the right to have opportunities to communicate in private with lawyers, judges, legislators, clergy, licensed healthcare providers, legally authorized representatives, advocates, and the Inspector General. Be provided with information about program services and policies in a manner, format, and language easily understood by the individual. Remember that the individuals you support have the same rights to privacy as anyone else. The individual has the right to ask you to leave if they would like to communicate privately with someone. Program rules will be discussed in Session 4. Freedoms of everyday life. From admission until discharge from services, each individual is entitled to enjoy all the freedoms of everyday life that are consistent with their need for services and the protection of others that do not interfere with his or her services and the services of others. These freedoms include, but are not limited to, freedom to move within the service setting and the community, freedom to communicate, associate, and meet privately with anyone the individual chooses, freedom to have and spend money, freedom to access television, radio, books, etc., freedom to keep and use personal items, freedom to use recreational facilities and enjoy the outdoors, freedom to make purchases in stores selling a basic selection of food and clothing, and freedom to receive services in a setting and under those conditions that are least restrictive. There are a couple of things I want to address under this regulation. The first one I want to talk about is the bullet point that has to do with the freedom to access television, radio, and books. Please keep in mind that if you're working in an individual's home, some of the things in the home are for community use and some things are for exclusive use only by the individual. The things that are for exclusive use by the individual are TVs, radios, the food that is stored in their house, their toilet paper, personal care items such as razors, deodorant. Each individual should have their own personal items that should be separate from the other individuals in the home. When it comes to the television and the radio, what is playing on the TV and what's playing on the radio should be the individual's choice. They should have ultimate control over the remote control and what things are being viewed on that television or what things are being played on that radio. At no time should the television and the radio be used for the direct support professional's personal use. We've already kind of touched on it, but the other piece that I want to look at is the freedom to keep and use personal items. Remember, an individual's personal items are for their exclusive use. We need to make sure that we know whose stuff is whose. When it comes to linens, when it comes to clothing, we still do put individuals' initials on the tags of those items, just to make sure that they're not being shared throughout the household. We shouldn't be doing community laundry. An individual's laundry should be washed separately from their roommates. They shouldn't be sharing towels. They should not be sharing clothing. This is not a family home. This is more of a roommate situation. So think of it that way. You wouldn't want your roommate to borrow your underwear. Our individuals don't want their roommates to borrow theirs. When it comes to freedoms of everyday life, remember that we want to encourage participation in normal activities and support the individual's freedoms. One of the things that you can do to help support an individual to participate in normal activities is helping them to find places they enjoy being that don't include people who are paid to be in their lives and don't include other people with intellectual disabilities. If we do this, if we help to encourage our folks to find different places to be, we're helping them to have a better life, and we're supporting the freedom of everyday life regulation. Remember, because it is so important, providers never, ever limit or restrict an individual's freedoms more than needed to achieve a therapeutic benefit, maintain a safe and orderly environment, and intervene in emergencies. It's really important when you go to write your GER that you are documenting what happened, what occurred that caused you to have to intervene, and what types of interventions were you providing. On your GER, you should be supporting the fact that you didn't provide more limiting or restrictive interventions than needed to regain control. So just remember that when you're in those tough situations and you have to write a GER for them. In residential settings, each individual has the right to live in humane, safe, sanitary environments that gives the individual, at minimum, sufficient and suitable clothing for his or her exclusive use, nutritionally adequate, varied, and appetizing meals that are prepared and served in sanitary conditions at appropriate times and temperatures, and that are consistent with any individualized diet program. In order to come in compliance with this regulation, it's important for you as a DSP to understand that ultimately you are responsible for making sure that the individual is living in a sanitary, safe environment. If at any time there's something unsafe in the home, you need to report that immediately to operations. You also need to document that you notified operations of whatever it is that's unsafe in the home. When it comes to sanitary environments, know that at Support Services of Virginia, the only thing that we use to sanitize our environment is bleach and water. Bleach is going to kill bloodborne pathogens as well as foodborne pathogens. So when you're cleaning the kitchen, make sure that you take extra care to use bleach to sanitize your environment. The same thing with the bathroom. If you don't like the way that the bleach smells, you are more than welcome to go back over those areas with a cleaner that smells better. But be sure that you're always using bleach so that we're making sure that our environments are sanitized. When mixing up bleach, make sure that you do 1 part bleach to 10 part water. That way the smell will be cut down for you. We should always have a solution of water and bleach mixed up and stored in a secure location on site at all times. When it comes to sufficient and suitable clothing for the person's exclusive use, remember that our individuals don't share clothing with one another unless it's their choice. So, to cover this regulation, unfortunately, we still do have to place initials on the tags of people's clothing, because you as a DSP may not know whose shirt belongs to who. Be sure that before you help or assist somebody in dressing that you check to make sure that the clothing does belong to them. We also want to make sure that the clothing is sufficient, meaning that the person has enough items to last them through an entire week. If a person does not have sufficient amounts of clothing, especially things like socks and underwear, you need to let your site coordinator know immediately and document that you've informed them. Also, suitable clothing. Does the person have a rain jacket to wear when it's raining outside? Does the person have a sweatshirt or a heavy jacket to wear when it's cold? Does the person have tank tops and t-shirts and shorts for the summertime? We want to make sure that all of these things are addressed, and as a direct support professional, it is your responsibility to notify the site coordinator if for some reason these needs are not met. Now let's look at nutritionally adequate, varied, and appetizing meals. In order to come into compliance with this regulation, the individuals complete a monthly menu with their site coordinator. The site coordinator takes into consideration the individual's preferences and dietary needs when helping them to create this menu. This menu helps us to prove to human rights and to licensing that we're meeting this regulation. It's very important that this calendar remain up to date. Now, do the individuals we support have to follow this menu plan every single day? Absolutely not. We definitely want to help the individuals we support recognize and understand that it's their right to eat what they would like, just like it's our right to do that. So if an individual or the individual and their roommates choose not to eat what has been written on the menu for that day, you as a DSP are simply going to draw a single line through the item that was on the calendar, and you're going to write on the calendar what the individuals actually chose to eat. So for example, let's say that meatloaf was scheduled for dinner tonight, and the individuals say, "Ew, we hate meatloaf. You really don't make it as well as Susie who comes in on Fridays, but you make really good chicken. So we'd rather have chicken tonight and meatloaf on Friday." That's perfectly fine. You're simply going to draw a single line through the meatloaf, and underneath it you're going to write chicken, whether it be baked or broiled or however you're preparing it. And then you're going to draw a single line through the Friday menu for for chicken, and you're going to change that to meatloaf. Please make sure that those calendars are updated regularly and that they truly reflect what's happening in the home. The other piece of this is serving the food at appropriate times and temperatures. Your job as a direct support professional is to offer meals at appropriate times, meaning typically when people eat in the home. So if breakfast is typically at 7 a.m., lunch is typically at noon, and dinner is typically at 5, your job is to begin to talk about dinner or breakfast or lunch and start to prepare it with or for the individual at those times. If at any time you're in the community and you go past the normal time that you would typically have your dinner, you're just simply going to document that in your progress notes. Please be sure that you check individuals' food allergies on a regular basis and make sure that you stay up to date on that information. Residential rights continued. Each individual has the right to reasonable privacy and private storage space, toilets, sinks, showers, and tubs designed to accommodate the individual's needs, privacy in the bathroom unless assessment clearly demonstrates supervision is needed for safety, in which case, remember, you should only support as long as needed with the door shut to protect privacy. And in exception of emergencies, males should never assist females with personal care, but females will be and should be assisting males. Let's take a look at a couple of things on this slide. The first bullet point, reasonable privacy and private storage space. When it comes to reasonable privacy and private storage space, be sure to keep the bathroom door closed when you are in the bathroom supporting an individual with personal care. Ensure that the door to the bedroom is closed before helping an individual get dressed. This applies even if everyone in the home is of the same gender. At no time should you be providing supports to two individuals in the bathroom at the same time. And remember that individuals do not share personal items. Each person living in the home should have their own personal items for their exclusive use and a place to store those items. When it comes to toilets, sinks, and showers, if the toilets, sinks, showers, or tubs are not designed to meet the individual's needs, you should report your concerns to your site coordinator and document that you have made a report on a T-log with the label or heading of Let's Communicate. For sponsored residential, you're going to make changes to the sinks, showers, and tubs as needed to come into compliance with this regulation. Also, I want to talk about needs for supervision. An individual's needs for supervision and supports will be outlined on their ISP. If an individual is deemed a danger to themselves or others, reasonable privacy may be overruled. For example, if an individual is suicidal We would we would put them into what we call eyes-on supervision at all times until they no longer want to harm themselves. This would mean we would no longer be able to provide reasonable privacy. Also, just want to stress that males should not assist females with personal care. Remember that this also includes dressing or changing briefs. Men should not be doing that for females. Residential rights continued. Room temperatures need to be comfortable year-round and compatible with health requirements. Clean air free of bad odors, windows and skylights in all major areas, direct outside air provided by a window that opens or an air conditioner. When it comes to these regulations, we want to make sure that room temperatures are comfortable year-round for the individual based on their preferences, not on the caregiver's preferences. So the room temperature should be what the individual wants, not necessarily what we, the caregiver, wants. Also, clean air free of bad odors. Remember that ultimately it is your responsibility as a direct support professional or a sponsor to keep the home clean and free of bad odors. Also, I want to look at air conditioning and heating. If the air conditioning or heat breaks in the home, you must report it immediately. Sponsors report this to the program supervisor or leadership on call when it's after hours. Residential would report problems to operations or leadership on call if it occurs after hours. Remember, this is a licensed residential home. In our homes, when the air conditioning breaks, we might use fans in the house for several days until it gets fixed. Or if the heat breaks, we might double up on blankets and get a space heater. This, however, may not be acceptable in a residential or sponsored home. So be sure that if the air conditioning or the heat breaks in your home and it's going to be more than just for a few hours, you get guidance from your supervisor or operations on how to handle that situation. Religious rights. Individuals served have the right to practice a religion and participate in religious services, provided that the services are not dangerous and do not interfere with the freedoms of others or general program rules or activities. What religion an individual participates in is based on their own personal choice. Be careful that you do not impose your beliefs on the individual receiving service. As an employee or a sponsor for an individual receiving services, you must transport individuals to worship services of their choosing and provide them supports during the service. This does not mean that you have to participate yourself, but you are required to support the person even if you do not agree with the religion. This is also where I will typically ask, can an individual join a cult? The answer is yes, as long as it's one of those tree-hugging, puppy-loving kind of cults and not the puppy-killing kind. In other words, restrictions can be placed on religious rights if the religion causes physical or psychological harm to the person or to others. But as far as non-traditional types of religions, we really don't have a say in that unless we can prove that they would be psychologically harmful or physically harmful to the person. Male rights. In residential settings, individuals have a right to have paper, pencils, and stamps free of charge for at least one letter every day upon request. You really don't have to worry about this in residential. Your site coordinator takes care of that for you. In sponsored residential homes, make sure that you have these materials for the person that you're supporting. Also, the individual has a right to communicate privately with any person by mail and have help in writing or to read mail as needed. An individual's access to mail can be limited only if the provider has reasonable cause to believe that the mail contains illegal materials or anything dangerous. If so, a professional may open the mail but not read it in the presence of the individual. So if you think that the mail contains something that is illegal or something that's dangerous, we would like you to bring that to your site service coordinator for both residential and for the sponsored programs, and they will go ahead and come into compliance with this regulation for you. One of the things that's really important to remember when it comes to individuals' mail is that we never ever open that piece of mail for them without their permission. So in other words, you go to the mailbox, there's something in there, you don't just open it up and start reading through it. You want to give it to the individual, and then if they need help with it, they can ask for that, and we're going to do that in their presence. The only exception to this is that we will get individual mail that are bills or are in that nature. Any type of bill or payment that needs to be made for the individual would get sent to the administration office so that we can help to pay those for them. Telephone rights. In residential settings, each individual has the right to communicate privately with any person by telephone and have help in doing so. The use of the phone can be limited to certain times and places to make sure that other individuals have equal access to the telephone, and so that other individuals in the home can also eat, sleep, and participate in activities without being disrupted. It's not uncommon that the congregate residential home will come up with guidelines for the telephone, especially if we have individuals that live in the home that all like to talk on the phone an equal amount of time. So what would happen then is your site coordinator would meet with the individuals living in the home, and we would come up with an agreement for the phone usage. Remember that we want to give people privacy, and so we tend to want to listen in on what's going on, but we need to be careful in doing that. We shouldn't be listening in on the individuals' conversations. We need to give them that due privacy to be able to speak with people. Also, remember, in residential, we need to have a landline in the house that can be accessed should there be a natural disaster. So if the electricity goes off, we need to have a landline that's not battery powered to make sure that we still have access to a telephone in emergencies. Visitor rights. In residential settings, each individual has the right to have or refuse visitors. An individual's access to visitors may be limited or supervised only when, in the judgment of a professional, the visits result in detrimental harm to the individual, may significantly or negatively affect the individual's treatment, or if the visitor is suspected of bringing contraband on site. Individuals, remember, can choose who can and cannot visit them. Your responsibility is to support the individual in their choices. Yes, this does include mom. If mom comes to visit the individual and the individual says, I don't want to see her today, then mom has to leave. This completes session 2 of your online human rights training. Please proceed back to Moodle to take the quiz.